The Hook, a dying alien's plea. Commander Valtrek lay on his back, staring at the dark sky above. His breathing was slow, weak. Pain filled every part of his body. The wreckage of his crashed ship surrounded him. Twisted metal, burning wires, and shattered glass. Smoke rose into the cold air. Somewhere in the distance, a small fire crackled. He tried to move. His body refused. His once strong arms, covered in gray scales, felt useless. His left leg was broken. He could feel the sharp pain deep in his bones. His people had lost. The Irene Empire, once powerful, once proud, was now nothing more than a memory. The Drakthar had crushed them. The war was over before it had even truly begun. The ex-Irene fleets had been outmatched, their homeworld taken, their warriors slaughtered. And now Valtrek was dying on some forgotten planet. Alone. His helmet's visor flickered with a weak blue glow. A soft voice came through his earpiece, his ship's eye, barely functional. Commander, distress beacon. Activated. A waste of power. No one was coming for him. The ex-Irene survivors, if there were any left, had already run. They had abandoned their own. There was no hope. Valtrek let out a slow, bitter breath. Maybe this is how it ends. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. He tensed. His hand reached for his sidearm, but his fingers were weak. He couldn't even lift it. The footsteps grew closer. Someone was here. Then a shadow fell over him. A figure stood against the night sky, blocking out the stars. The shape was tall but lean, moving with purpose. As the figure stepped forward, the firelight illuminated his face. A human. Valtrek felt a surge of anger, mixed with confusion. Humans were supposed to be weak, insignificant. Their worlds had been among the first to fall to the Drakthar. What was one of them doing here? The human knelt beside him, eyes scanning his injuries. He was dressed in a patched-up combat suit, worn and dirty. His dark hair was messy, his face rough with exhaustion. A rifle was slung over his back, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he sighed. "You look like hell, buddy." Valtrek tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The human didn't wait for a response. He reached into a small pouch on his belt, pulled out a metal canister, and held it out. Water. Valtrek hesitated. This had to be a trick. No species showed mercy to a fallen warrior. No enemy helped the defeated. The human raised an eyebrow. "You gonna drink or just stare at it?" Valtrek's body made the choice for him. His hand, shaking and weak, took the canister. He lifted it to his lips and drank. The water was warm, stale, but to him, it was life itself. The human washed him carefully. Not like a scavenger, not like a killer, but like someone who had seen too many people die. Finally, the human sat back, resting his arms on his knees. "Name's Ethan. Ethan Cole." Valtrek narrowed his eyes. Why? Why was this human helping him? His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "I am your enemy." Ethan shrugged. "Not today." Valtrek frowned. The human's words made no sense. No species was this foolish. The Drakthar had won. Fighting was meaningless. But Ethan didn't seem to care about that. He pulled a small medical kit from his pack and started working on Valtrek's wounds. His movements were quick, practiced. He wrapped a bandage around the alien's broken leg, tightened a piece of cloth around his injured arm. The pain flared, sharp and hot, but Valtrek didn't resist. As Ethan worked, he spoke. "Came down in the same fight you did. Colony got hit hard. My ship went down just like yours." That explained why he was here, but why was he helping? Valtrek's mind raced. Humans were not strong. Not like the Drakthar. Not even like the Irene. But there was something different about them. Something unnatural. They didn't surrender. Even when it made no sense. Even when they had lost. Ethan stood up, stretching his back. "All right, big guy. I'll make you a deal. Asterisk, 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 you rest up. Tomorrow, we find a way off this rock. Valtryek stared at him. A way off this rock. There was no way. No ships. No backup. And yet, Ethan believed. It was insane. It was impossible. But for the first time since the war began, since his world burned, Valtryek felt something he thought had died with his people. Hope. The human's defiance. Valtryek awoke to pain. It was not the sharp, burning pain of fresh wounds, but the dull, constant ache of survival. He was still alive. That realization filled him with both relief and dread. The universe had already abandoned him. So why was he still breathing? The answer sat across from him, poking at a small fire. The human. Ethan Cole. The name still felt strange in his mind. His people had studied humans, but never with much concern. They were a young species, still divided, still learning what it meant to exist among the stars. They had no great empire, no legendary warriors, no reason to be feared. Yet here he was, alive only because of one. Ethan glanced up, noticed Valtryek stirring, and nodded. Good. You didn't die. The human spoke casually, as if death was nothing more than an inconvenience. His voice was rough, edged with exhaustion, but there was no weakness in it. Valtryek shifted, testing his limbs. His leg was wrapped in makeshift bandages. His arm, which had been a useless weight before, had been treated with a crude but effective splint. The human's work. He flexed his fingers, feeling the tightness of the bandages, the way they held his body together when it should have fallen apart. The HFY had entire medical teams to handle battlefield injuries, but Ethan had done all of this with nothing more than scraps. Human ingenuity. It was the one thing the HFY always underestimated. Valtryek let out a slow breath. You should have left me. Ethan snorted. Yeah, well, I don't take orders from dying aliens. Valtryek stared at him. This human made no sense. He had nothing to gain by saving an enemy. Even if Valtryek recovered, he would still be a soldier of the Kyrene. Or at least, he had been. There was no Kyrene army left. No fleet. No empire. He had no orders to follow anymore. Just the weight of defeat pressing down on him. Ethan tossed him a small ration pack. Eat. You'll need your strength. Valtryek caught it out of instinct. He examined the package, noting the human symbols printed on its surface. Military rations. Human food. His stomach clenched. His body demanded sustenance, but his pride resisted. He had sworn never to rely on lesser species, never to accept their pity. But this wasn't pity. The human wasn't looking at him with sympathy or sadness. He wasn't treating Valtryek like a wounded animal. He was treating him like a soldier, like someone who could still fight. Valtryek opened the package. The food inside smelled strange, foreign and unfamiliar, but he ate anyway. It tasted dry, too salty, but his body didn't care. Ethan watched him, nodding in approval. Not bad, huh? Tastes like garbage, but it keeps you alive. Valtryek swallowed, eyeing the human carefully. Why? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why what? Valtryek's voice was quiet but firm. Why are you helping me? For the first time, Ethan's easygoing expression faltered. He looked at the fire, his fingers tightening slightly around the stick he was using to poke at the embers. Because I know what it's like to be left behind. Silence. Valtryek studied the human's face. There was something behind those words. A history of loss. A story untold. He had seen that same look in the eyes of his own soldiers, those who had survived when others had not. Survivor's guilt. Ethan took a slow breath, then shook his head, forcing a small grin. Besides, you're still breathing. That means we got a chance. A chance. A chance for what? The HFY were defeated. The Drakthar controlled the system. There was no war left to fight. Valtryek clenched his jaw. You don't understand. The Drakthar will return. They always do. Ethan's expression didn't change. Then we'll be ready." The words were spoken with such certainty, such confidence, that for a moment, Valtryek almost believed them. But then reality crashed down on him like a tidal wave. He forced himself to sit up. His body screamed in protest, but he ignored it. "No, you don't understand." His voice was sharp now, full of warning. "The Drakthar don't leave survivors. When they see my distress signal, they won't come for a rescue. They'll come to finish the job. And when they do, they will wipe out everything, including you." Ethan met his gaze, calm and steady. "Then we don't let them." Valtryek bared his teeth. "You cannot fight them alone." Ethan grinned. "Who said I was alone?" Valtryek froze. The human wasn't looking at him like an enemy. He wasn't looking at him like a burden. He was looking at him like an ally, like someone who could still fight. Valtryk's hands curled into fists. He was broken, injured, and weak. His people had abandoned him. The war had been lost. But this human refused to accept defeat. A small ember of something dangerous stirred in Valtryk's chest, something he had not felt since before the war began. Hope. Ethan stood up, brushing off his hands. "Get some rest, big guy. Tomorrow, we start planning." Valtryek narrowed his eyes. "Planning what?" Ethan smiled, but there was nothing soft about it. It was the grin of a man who had lost everything but still refused to break. A fight. The impossibility of hope. Valtryk's body still ached when he woke up, but the pain was secondary to something else. The human was already moving. Ethan was crouched over a pile of scavenged supplies, sorting through broken metal scraps, shattered weapons, and pieces of technology that had no business being useful. His hands moved quickly, with purpose, as if every second mattered. Valtryek pushed himself upright, groaning as his injured leg throbbed. The crude bandages held, thanks to the human's care. He still didn't understand why Ethan had bothered. "You should not waste your time," Valtryek muttered. Ethan didn't look up. "Good morning to you too." Valtryk's mandibles tightened. "I am telling you the truth. The Drakthar are coming back. We have no ship, no weapons, no hope." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you really love repeating bad news, don't you?" Valtryek growled in frustration. "You refuse to see reality. We are stranded on a dead planet with no escape. The enemy will arrive soon, and when they do, they will wipe us out." Ethan finally looked up, meeting Valtryk's glare with an infuriatingly calm expression. "Yeah. Well, let me ask you something. If we're already dead, what's stopping us from fighting back?" Valtryk's breath caught. Fighting back. It was an absurd thought. He had fought in a war that was already lost. He had watched the Tyrene fleet burn, watched his people surrender to the overwhelming power of the Drakthar. And yet, this human, this lone, insignificant survivor, was not afraid. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let's get one thing straight, big guy. I've been through worse than this. You think the Drakthar scare me. You think a fleet of ships means I just sit down and die. No, that's not what we do." Valtryk's claws dug into the dirt. You speak as if I am one of you." Ethan shrugged. "Right now, you're not Tyrene. I'm not human. We're two guys stuck on a rock, and the only way we live is if we stop acting like we've already lost." Valtryek stared at him, something cold twisting in his chest. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell Ethan how foolish he sounded. But deep down, something worse gnawed at him. A part of him wanted to believe. He turned his gaze to the broken wreckage around them. There was nothing useful here, just scraps and debris, a graveyard. And yet, Ethan was working as if these scraps were enough to build an army. Valtryek exhaled. "What is your plan, human?" Ethan grinned. "We buy time. We make them bleed. We make them regret ever landing here." Valtryek let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You intend to wage war with sticks and broken metal." Ethan didn't flinch. Humans don't need much to turn nothing into something. Valtryek narrowed his eyes. You think like a scavenger. Ethan gave him a mock salute. I think like someone who wants to live. Valtryek clenched his jaw. His warrior instincts screamed at him that this was madness, that the Drakthar were too powerful, that fighting was suicide. But deep in his bones, something stirred. Something old. Something beaten but not broken. Pride. For the first time in days, he thought about his people, not as victims, but as warriors. The Exirene had ruled the stars once. They had been strong. Had they lost that strength? Had he? Ethan tossed him a small device. Valtryek caught it, inspecting it with curiosity. A power cell, damaged but still functional. I need your help, Ethan said. Valtryek glanced up. With what? Ethan smirked. Making sure the Drakthar's landing party never makes it home. A desperate plan. They had little, but little was enough. Ethan worked tirelessly, pulling apart the wreckage and fashioning something out of nothing. He moved with precision, taking whatever was still usable and repurposing it. Valtryek watched in fascination. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the most advanced. But they adapted. They changed. They refused to accept failure. It was unnatural. Valtryek found himself pulled into the work. Despite his injuries, despite his doubts, he helped. His warrior instincts kicked in, guiding his hands as he rewired broken circuits, fused old energy cores, and stripped away what they couldn't use. Ethan grinned. Told you that big brain of yours would come in handy. Valtryek huffed. I do not do this for you, human. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, sure. Hours passed. Then more. By the time they stopped, they had built something crude but deadly. A trap. The Drakthar expected a dead world easy prey. They would find detonators buried under sand, EMP spikes waiting to fry their ships, and a turret, salvaged from Valtryk's wrecked ship, rigged to fire one last shot. Valtryek studied their work. It was imperfect. It was ugly, but it was ready. He turned to Ethan. You truly believe this will make a difference? Ethan's expression darkened, just for a moment. The second you stop fighting, that's when you lose. Valtryek frowned. And if they come with overwhelming force? Ethan's smirk returned, but there was steel behind it. Then we make sure they never forget what happens when you push too hard. Valtryek felt something strange, a deep, unshakable certainty. Humans were insane. But maybe, just maybe, insanity was exactly what they needed. A desperate plan. Valtryek had always been a warrior. He had fought in battles across the stars, faced enemies with advanced technology and brutal tactics. He had trained in the art of war since his youth, mastering weapons, strategy, and combat. But never, not once in his long life, had he seen warfare like this. Ethan was crouched in the dirt, scribbling lines in the sand with a broken metal rod. His voice was steady, his hands moving with certainty as he laid out a battle plan built not on strength, not on numbers, but on something else entirely. Deception, surprise, cunning. Valtryek sat across from him, arms crossed, staring at the mess of crude shapes and arrows drawn in the sand. It looked nothing like the battle strategies he had studied. There were no formations, no direct assaults, no clear lines of engagement. Instead, there were traps, ambush points, environmental hazards turned into weapons. This was not the way of the Kyrene, but it was the way of humans. Ethan tapped a small X in the center of his plan. This is where they'll land. The Drakthar always stick to open ground. They rely on their heavy armor and numbers, so they don't care about cover. That's their first mistake. Valtryek narrowed his eyes. And their second. Ethan grinned, thinking we're already dead. Valtryek exhaled slowly, considering. The Drakthar are not fools. They will scan the area before landing. If they detect any energy signatures, they will know something is wrong. Ethan tapped his temple, which is why we make it look like nothing's wrong. We scatter power cells to create false readings. We hide the real traps under the debris they expect to find. Valtryek studied the human carefully. He had fought alongside many great tacticians in his time, but Ethan's mind worked differently. He wasn't thinking like a soldier following orders. He was thinking like a hunter. Ethan's finger traced another line in the sand. When their first wave lands, we let them walk right into the field. That's when we hit them. Hard. Valtryek's mandibles tightened. We do not have heavy weapons. Ethan's grin didn't fade. He reached behind him, grabbing a small battered device, one of the few pieces of tech they had salvaged. It was an EMP detonator. Valtryek's eyes widened. That is, unstable. Ethan nodded. Yup, but unstable is exactly what we need. If we time it right, it'll fry their power armor, knock out their weapons for a few minutes. Valtryek exhaled. A few minutes is not enough. Ethan tilted his head. It is if we make them count. For a long moment, Valtryek simply stared at him. He had fought against humans before. He had seen their ships break under superior firepower, watched their soldiers fall against stronger enemies, but he had never seen them stop fighting. Not even when all logic told them to. Not even when survival was impossible. He glanced back down at the crude battlefield drawn in the sand. It was reckless, dangerous, desperate, and yet, it just might work. Finally, he spoke. What do you need me to do? Ethan's grin widened. Now you're getting it. The art of human warfare. The next few hours were a flurry of movement. Ethan and Valtryek worked side by side, gathering whatever they could from the wreckage. Every piece of debris, every broken weapon, every discarded power cell became something useful. Valtryek had always believed war was about strength. The species with the best technology, the best weapons, the best warriors, they won. But Ethan's methods were different. He didn't fight with strength. He fought with creativity. They buried explosive cells beneath the dirt, setting them to detonate only when triggered by pressure. They scavenged long, metal beams from the wreckage, sharpening them into improvised spears that could pierce armor if dropped from above. Ethan even used pieces of his own crashed ship's radio transmitter to create a frequency jammer, not strong enough to block all signals, but just enough to disrupt enemy communications for a few critical minutes. As they worked, Valtryek found himself watching Ethan more closely. The human never slowed, never hesitated, even when things went wrong. When a power cell nearly exploded in his hands, when a snapped wire ruined their first EMP trap, he simply adjusted, adapted, moved forward. It was unnatural. It was frustrating. And it was inspiring. Finally, as the sun began to set over the desolate world, Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and stepped back to admire their work. The battlefield was ready. Valtryek stood beside him, arms crossed. This is madness. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, but it's the kind of madness that just might work. Valtryek shook his head. If I had not seen it myself, I would not have believed it. The way you humans fight. He paused, searching for the right words. It is not war. It is survival. Ethan glanced at him. Same thing, isn't it? Valtryek let out a deep breath. Not always. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The wind howled through the wreckage. Then, in the distance, a sound. A deep rumbling noise, growing louder. Engines. Valtryek's stomach tightened. They are coming. Ethan cracked his knuckles. Good. Valtryek turned to him, frowning. You sound eager. Ethan's expression was unreadable, but there was a fire in his eyes. Because now we get to teach them what happens when you underestimate a human. Final preparations. They moved quickly, checking every trap, reinforcing every hiding spot. Valtryek could feel his heart pounding in his chest, not with fear, but with something else. Something dangerous. Hope. For the first time since the war began, since his people had lost everything, he felt the fire of battle burning inside him again. And standing beside him, This insane, reckless human, who should have given up long ago, was still smiling. The engines in the sky grew louder. The Drakthar were almost here. Valtryek gripped his weapon, flexing his claws. Let them come. The first strike. Humanity's way. The sky trembled. Valtryek stood beside Ethan, his gaze locked on the distant horizon, where the air shimmered with the heat of incoming engines. The Drakthar were here. Their landing craft descended like hungry beasts, their hulls dark against the burning orange sky. They moved in perfect formation, cold, precise, disciplined. Valtryek knew their strategy before the first ship even touched the ground. Standard invasion protocol. They would scan the battlefield first, deploy drones to ensure there were no survivors, secure the area, then begin sweeping for useful technology. They expected no resistance, and that was their first mistake. Ethan crouched beside him, checking the detonator strapped to his wrist. His fingers drummed against the casing, his eyes locked on the enemy. No fear. Valtryek didn't understand it. A human should not be calm in the face of an overwhelming force. A human should not be smiling when staring at certain death. And yet, Ethan grinned like a man who had already won. Valtryek exhaled. The moment they detect the power surges from our traps, they will adjust. They will adapt. Ethan didn't look away from the enemy. Then we just have to hit them harder than they can adjust. The first Drakthar dropship touched the ground. Its landing thrusters sent up waves of dust and debris, covering the field in a thick, hazy mist. The massive loading ramp extended with a hiss of pressurized air. Valtryk's muscles tensed. Here they come. A squad of 10 Drakthar soldiers stepped forward, their armor gleaming under the dim sunlight. Ethan exhaled. Come on, you ugly bastards. Step a little further. The Drakthar moved cautiously, their rifles scanning the wreckage. Their leader, a towering brute clad in thick command armor, gestured to his squad. 2 broke off, sweeping left. 2 more headed right. The rest followed behind, advancing toward the center of the battlefield. They were right where Ethan wanted them. Ethan's finger hovered over the detonator. 3, 2, 1. He pressed it. The ground exploded. A shockwave tore through the battlefield as the buried power cells detonated, sending jagged shrapnel and raw energy through the air. The Drakthar squad was caught mid-step. 3 were thrown like ragdolls, their armor crushed from the blast. The survivors scrambled for cover, their movements chaotic. That was mistake number 2. Valtryek fired first. His plasma rifle discharged a searing blue bolt, striking the nearest Drakthar in the shoulder. The alien roared, stumbling back, before Ethan's sniper shot finished the job, punching through his exposed visor. 1 down. The remaining Drakthar returned fire, their heavy rifles cutting through the dust-filled air. Bright red streaks of plasma flashed past Ethan's head, missing by inches. He didn't flinch. Instead, he rolled to cover, reloading in one fluid motion. Valtryek moved beside him, using the wreckage for protection. This wasn't how Xerene fought. They preferred honor, open combat, strength against strength. But humans fought dirty. And it worked. Ethan activated the EMP spike. A pulse of raw energy rippled across the field, crashing into the Drakthar's armor systems. Sparks danced across their bodies as their targeting visors shorted out. Their rifles powered down, leaving them momentarily defenseless. Ethan smirked. Now it's a fair fight. Valtryek lunged. He tore through the closest enemy with a vicious swipe of his claws, his strength ripping through weakened armor. The Drakthar gurgled, collapsing as Valtryek seized his weapon. Ethan took down another before they could recover, his rifle barking fire. The remaining enemies tried to retreat, falling back toward their landing craft. Valtryek wasn't about to let that happen. He grabbed a discarded plasma grenade, primed it, and hurled it toward the ship's open ramp. The device clattered inside just as the Drakthar realized their mistake. The explosion engulfed the ship's interior, fire and smoke billowing from the entrance. The last two Drakthar barely had time to scream before Ethan's rifle put them down. Then, suddenly, silence. The battle was over. The wreckage burned, filling the air with the stench of scorched metal and alien blood. Valtric's chest heaved. His claws dripped dark fluid. His heart pounded, not with fear, not with rage, but with something else. Exhilaration. Ethan stood beside him, breathing hard. He wiped his forehead, grinning through the dirt and sweat. See, that wasn't so bad. Valtric's mandibles clicked. You are insane. Ethan chuckled. And you're still alive. Valtric looked down at his blood-stained hands, at the battlefield they had created. He had spent his whole life believing that strategy, discipline, and superior firepower were the only ways to win a war. That once those advantages were gone, the fight was lost. But humans didn't fight like that. They fought like survivors. And for the first time in a long time, Valtric felt like a warrior again. But the victory was short-lived. A deep rumbling shook the ground beneath them. Ethan stiffened. That's not good. Valtric followed his gaze to the sky. The air shimmered once more, not from one ship, but dozens. The main Drakthar fleet had arrived. Their attack had been noticed. And now, the real battle was about to begin. Valtric exhaled, gripping his rifle. He turned to Ethan. You still believe we can win? Ethan cracked his neck, raising his weapon. I believe we can make them regret ever landing here. The last stand. The air trembled with the roar of approaching engines. Valtric felt the ground shake beneath his feet as dozens of Drakthar ships tore through the atmosphere, their heavy frames casting long shadows across the battlefield. The sky, once a dark expanse of cold indifference, now burned with the glow of thrusters and descending warships. Ethan stood beside him, rifle in hand, shoulders squared. He wasn't running. Neither of them were. Valtric clenched his jaw. He had always believed in fighting with honor. He had always trusted in the strength of his people, in the power of his empire. But those things were gone. What remained was this moment. What remained was one last fight. And somehow, a single human standing beside him made that seem possible. The onslaught begins. The Drakthar warships landed in tight formation, their doors hissing open to reveal wave after wave of enemy soldiers. Valtric quickly counted them. Too many. He had seen entire legions fall to smaller forces. But this wasn't a battle. This was an execution. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. Damn, they really brought the whole party. Valtric growled. You should have left when you had the chance. Ethan smirked, glancing sideways. Yeah, and missed the fun. Valtric felt something strange, a flicker of amusement. The human's defiance was impossible. It made no sense, but as he looked out at the enemy, at the overwhelming force coming to wipe them from existence, he realized he no longer cared about logic. He wanted to fight. He wanted to make them pay. Ethan pulled a small detonator from his belt. All right, big guy. Let's make him work for it. He pressed the button. Chaos erupted. The battlefield exploded as hidden traps ignited. EMP charges pulsed, frying enemy weapons and sensors. Shrapnel mines shredded the first wave. A Drakthar squad broke formation, trying to fall back, only to trigger a secondary blast. Their bodies vanished in a flash of fire and debris. The Drakthar had expected slaughter. Instead, they walked into a death trap. Valtric moved first, charging through the chaos with his stolen rifle. He fired without hesitation, each shot burning through Drakthar armor, each movement calculated and lethal. Ethan was right beside him, moving with precision, using cover, firing at weak points. A single human standing against an empire. And winning. For a moment, it felt possible. For a moment, it felt like they could actually hold the line. Then the sky screamed. Overwhelming force. A massive Drakthar war mech dropped from the lead ship, landing with a deafening crash. Its armored frame stood 3 times taller than a man, its twin cannons glowing with molten energy. Valtryek's heart froze. Ethan exhaled sharply. Well, that's new. The mech locked onto them. Fired. A beam of pure energy ripped through the battlefield. Valtryek barely dove aside in time as the ground where he stood turned to molten glass. Too powerful. Too fast. Valtryek turned, shouting, "We cannot fight that." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Then we don't. We outsmart it." The mech fired again, but Ethan was already moving. Diving. Rolling. Reloading. Valtryek followed, pushing his battered body past its limits. He had never fought like this before, never like a human. But it was working. The mech lumbered forward, its weapons tracking them. Ethan suddenly stopped. Right beneath it. Valtryek's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Ethan grinned. "Ending this." He yanked a grenade from his belt, primed it, and jammed it into an exposed maintenance hatch on the mech's underbelly. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed Valtryek and ran. Boom! The explosion tore through the mech's core, sending it crashing to the ground in a heap of molten wreckage. Valtryek lay there, stunned, staring at the smoking ruin. Ethan groaned. "Oof, that was closer than I wanted." Valtryek blinked. "You are insane." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The final push. More Drakthars swarmed the field. Too many. The fight was slipping. Ethan reloaded, gritting his teeth. "We can't hold much longer." Valtryek looked around. Their traps were spent. Their ammo was low. Their bodies were failing. But their will, still unbroken. Ethan turned to him. "I've got one last trick, but I need time." Valtryek nodded. "Then I will buy it." He rose to his feet, battered, bleeding, but unyielding. Then he charged. The last of the Drakthar turned in surprise as the wounded Cyrene threw himself into them with the fury of an entire lost empire. Valtryek fought like a human. Clever. Ruthless. Desperate. For every enemy that fell, another took its place. His limbs felt heavy, his vision blurred. His body was failing. But he kept fighting. He did not stop. Not until he heard the voice. "Move, big guy." He turned just in time to see Ethan on the ridge above, holding a salvaged Drakthar transmitter. He had activated their own fleet's orbital bombardment codes. Valtryek's breath caught. "You?" Ethan grinned. "I told you I had one last trick." Then the sky burned. The aftermath. Drakthar warships rained fire upon their own forces, their bombardment codes hijacked, their own fleet turned against them. Explosions ripped through enemy ranks. The battlefield became a graveyard. By the time the smoke cleared, it was over. Valtryek staggered, barely able to stand. The Drakthar were gone. What little remained of their forces had fled. He turned to Ethan. The human was on one knee, exhausted, burned, but smiling. Valtryek let out a slow breath. "I cannot believe you lived." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, me neither." They stood together in the ruin of the battlefield, a Cyrene warrior and a human survivor. Not enemies. Not allies. Brothers in arms. Valtryek exhaled. "So, what now?" Ethan wiped blood from his brow, cracked his neck, and grinned. "Now, we go find more people to piss off." Valtryek laughed. For the first time in what felt like forever, he laughed. The war wasn't over. The Drakthar were still out there. But now, they had a reason to fight. Now, they had hope. A new dawn for a lost race. The battlefield lay in ruin. Smoke curled into the sky, painting black streaks across the dimming horizon. Bodies, Drakthar and Cyrene alike, were scattered across the scorched earth, remnants of a war that should have ended long ago. Valtryek stood at the center of it all, barely breathing, his body aching with wounds that should have killed him. Yet, somehow, he remained upright. He had no right to be alive. And yet, he was. Across from him, Ethan sat against a piece of wreckage, wiping the blood from his face with the back of his sleeve. His uniform was torn, his rifle lay discarded at his side, and his hands trembled from exhaustion. But he was grinning. Valtryek stared at him. "You smile too much, human." Ethan let out a ragged chuckle. "Yeah, well, I smile when I win." Valtryk's mandibles twitched. "You consider this victory?" Ethan looked around, surveying the aftermath of the battle. Drakthar bodies burned. Their war machines lay in twisted heaps. Their ships had been forced back. He met Valtryk's gaze. "We're still breathing, aren't we?" Valtryek exhaled, shaking his head. Humans. They had no logic, no reason to fight when all odds were against them, no reason to smile in the face of death. And yet, here they were. The war isn't over. A low hum filled the air. Valtryk's head snapped up. His body tensed, expecting another enemy fleet, another battle, another hopeless fight. But this sound was different. It wasn't Drakthar. It was Kyrene. Valtryk's heart pounded as he turned toward the sky. He saw the first Kyrene warships break through the atmosphere, their sleek forms cutting through the clouds like blades. More ships followed. Hundreds. Ethan whistled. "Well, Dan, you called for backup." Valtryek shook his head. "I did not." And then it hit him. They had seen. Somewhere, out there in the vast, broken remains of the Kyrene Empire, someone had been watching. Someone had seen the battle. Someone had witnessed a lone human and a dying warrior stand against an empire and refuse to surrender. And they had answered. The comms unit in Valtryk's armor crackled. A voice, a familiar one, came through. "Commander Valtryek, is it truly you?" Valtryk's chest tightened. The voice belonged to General Sarek, one of the last surviving Kyrene leaders. Valtryek pressed a clawed hand to his comms. "General, I thought you were dead." A pause. Then laughter. "We thought the same of you." The rebirth of a fallen people. The Kyrene ships began landing, their troops spilling onto the battlefield. For the first time in years, Valtryek saw his people not as exiles or broken warriors, but as something more. They had hope again. Hope, not because of their ships, not because of their weapons, but because of what had happened here. Because of one human who refused to die. General Sarek approached, his eyes scanning the devastation before settling on Valtryek. His mandibles twitched, showing a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I never thought I would see you again, old friend." Valtryek nodded. "Nor I." Then Sarek's eyes flickered to Ethan, still slumped against the wreckage. He raised a brow. "And this?" Valtryek glanced at Ethan, then back to his commander. "This is why we are still alive." Sarek frowned, as if unsure what to make of the battered human. But Ethan, ever unbothered, lifted a hand in a lazy wave. "Sup?" Sarek looked back to Valtryek, confused. "He fights with us." Valtryk's mandibles twitched. "He fought beside me when no one else did, when even I had given up." Sarek studied Ethan, as if measuring his worth. Then, slowly, he extended a hand. Ethan hesitated, then clasped it. A Kyrene general and a human survivor. For the first time in history, they were not enemies. They were allies. A new purpose. Later, when the battlefield had been secured and the last of the wounded had been tended to, Ethan and Valtryek stood at the edge of a ridge, overlooking the Kyrene fleet as it moved in formation. Ethan let out a slow breath. "So, what now?" Valtryek didn't answer immediately. He had spent so long thinking of himself as a soldier of a fallen empire, as a warrior with no war left to fight. But that wasn't true anymore. The Kyrene still lived. The war was not over. And neither was he. He turned to Ethan. "You are without a people, human." Ethan snorted. "Yeah, thanks for the reminder." Valtryk's mandibles twitched. "Come with us." Ethan blinked. "Wait. What?" Valtryek crossed his arms. You fought like one of us. You bled like one of us. And you showed us something we had forgotten. What it means to resist." Ethan hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Valtryek watched him closely. Humans were odd. So powerful in their stubbornness, yet so unsure of their own worth. Finally, Ethan sighed. "Well, I guess if you guys have better food than rations, I'm in." Valtryek smirked. "Welcome to the fight, human." Epilogue. The legend begins. Days later, the story of the human who refused to give up spread across the Tyrene remnants. It was said that when all hope was lost, when that Tyrene had been shattered and broken, a single warrior had stood against the tide. And beside him, against all odds, stood a human, a species that had been dismissed, ignored, thought to be weak. But this human had done what no Tyrene had. He had refused to surrender. And in doing so, he had reignited the fire of a dying people. The war was not over. But now, the Tyrene had something they had not felt in a long, long time. Hope.